位弟兄姊妹平安，又嚟到以斯拉培訓網絡嘅考古新知。今日咧係嚟到第11講，咁本來咧就唔係講呢個題目嘅，因為排住隊仲有好多咧考古嘅題目要講。不過咧，琴日發生嘅事，好多弟兄姊妹咧就打電郵嚟到詢問，咁不如咧我哋都講一講呢個。雖然唔係話乜嘢考古嘅發現，但係都係同咧猶太人、猶太教佢哋過往同埋現時嘅宗教生活咧有關係。不如咧我哋喺呢處都交代一下。咁所講係乜嘢咧？咁就係以色列嘅篝火節慘劇嘅前因後果。咁其實咧過往成年幾噶啦，我哋都落喺一種嘅疫症嘅危機底下。咁對於猶太人嚟講咧，佢哋認為哎呀，好唔容易咧捱過咗呢年幾嘅時間。咁但係而家咧就碰上咗呢一次嘅死亡嘅災難。點解會咁講咧？嗱，今日咧就係4月30號，琴日啫嘛。琴日發生嘅事咧就係以色列北部咧就係有猶太教嘅一個名勝嘅地方，就叫做咧係墨蘭山。咁琴晚咧就發生咗咧就死亡嘅一個慘劇。咁係因為咧有人彼此嘅踐踏嘅緣故。咁原來嗰件事咧就係同慶祝有一個好重大嘅宗教嘅慶典。咁舊年咧就係因為咧就有疫症嘅原因咧，就被迫取消。呢一個咧就係嗰個叫篝火節。咁其實往年更多人，舊年冇嘅話，今年有幾多人咧？咁今年咧有超過成10萬名嘅正統派嘅猶太教徒，咁一齊湧去呢一個嘅墨蘭山。咁成晚都喺嗰度噶啦，諗住就要嚟慶祝。咁現場咧，由於咧就好擠篤，好多人啦入口咧又好狹窄啦。咁警方咧又要咧有呢一個嘅防疫嘅管控啦。咁結果都冇辦法管得掂啦，因為太多人。咁結果咧人潮洶湧嚇。咁結果咧參加嘅人應該係因為咧當時有一個台咧係倒塌，咁大家好恐慌，一齊失控嘅時候彼此踐踏。咁應該到現時為止咧有成45人咧喺呢一次咧係活咁樣俾人踩死嘅。咁你話點解會有咁樣嘅宗教事件發生，有咁多人去嘅咧？咁我呢個時候咧講一講個背景先。咁原來呢一個咧係1年1度嘅篝火節，咁係猶太教嘅信仰嘅一個習俗。咁原來呢一個咧就喺逾越節一路去到五旬節嗰50日中間嘅第33日。咁呢一個咧係一個傳統嚟嘅。咁而且咧就係有一個咧就點火嘅一個慶典。咁其實咧除咗喺以色列之外咧，各地嘅地方咧都會趁住呢個機會咧有呢個儀式。咁並且咧有啲嘅人仲會揾機會咧喺呢個時候舉行婚禮添。咁所以咧喺1年裏邊咧人潮洶湧最多嘅。咁通常佢哋仲會通宵狂歡喺嗰處載歌載舞咁發生事件咧呢一個咧叫做墨蘭山。咁亦都係嗰個嘅慶典嘅最重要嘅中心，因為原來喺呢一處咧有一個墳墓。呢個墳墓咧係屬於一個猶太教嘅賢者，佢嘅名咧係一個拉比嚟嘅，叫西門巴約海。咁所以喺佢個墓嗰處咧就有呢個慶典。咁你話到底呢個拉比係乜嘢人？點解咁多人咁尊重佢？佢人生裏邊教導啲乜嘢？點解呢一啲咁樣嘅極端或者係一啲嘅好有熱心嘅猶太教徒會有咁多人都會守呢個節咧？咁喺呢個時候咧，不如咧讓我哋一齊嚟睇一套嘅短片。咁呢個短片咧原本係英文，就加上咗希伯來文嘅。咁我哋配上咗中文嘅字幕，好幫助大家咧容易了解。
Hi everyone! Lag BaOmer is coming up, which according to tradition is the anniversary of the death of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, a Talmudic sage from the 2nd century. Every year on Lag BaOmer, tens of thousands of people travel to his burial place in Meron, a small town in northern Israel where they sing and dance around giant bonfires to celebrate his legacy. But who was Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai? What exactly was his legacy? And what about his legacy is so important that we're celebrating it? To answer this, we're going to take a deep dive into a fascinating story from the Talmud about Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. When we're done, I think we'll have a new and meaningful way to connect to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and Lag BaOmer. The story, found in Masechet Shabbat, is set at a point in history when the Romans were occupying Israel. the Romans hear that Rabbi Shimon was criticizing them, and they sentence him to death. So, Rabbi Shimon and his son, Rabbi Elazar, go into hiding in a secluded cave, where they spend their days doing nothing but studying Torah and praying. They're in the cave for 12 years, miraculously sustained by a spring of water and a carob tree, until one day, Eliyahu Hanavi, Elijah the prophet himself, informs them they are no longer being pursued. Now, let's see what happens when they leave the cave and re-enter the world. Nafku. They emerged. Chazu inshi de kakarve vizare, and they saw people plowing and sowing seeds. But Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai doesn't like what he sees. Amar, manichin chaye olam v'oskim b'chaye sha'ah. He cried out, "These people are abandoning eternal life for life of this world. They're putting aside Torah study to work their fields, worthless earthly pursuits." He couldn't imagine why anyone would do that. Kol makom shenotnim einehem miyad nisraf. And suddenly, any place Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and his son would turn their gaze, it immediately went up in flames. Yasta bat kol. A voice from heaven called out to them, V'amra lahem, and it said, L'hachariv olami etzatem? Did you come out here to destroy my world? Chizru l'ma'aratchem. Go back into your cave, before you cause any more damage. After this heavenly rebuke, Rabbi Shimon and his son returned to the cave for one more year, and then emerged once again. But this time, things go a little differently. Nafku. They came out. Kol heicha dehavemachi Rabbi Elazar, havimasi Rabbi Shimon. Whatever Rabbi Elazar damaged, Rabbi Shimon repaired. In other words, Rabbi Elazar is still burning things left and right. But for Rabbi Shimon, something has changed. Not only is he not spitting fire from his eyes anymore, all the damage that his son causes, he's able to undo. Rabbi Shimon then turns to his son and says, Dai la'olam ani ve'ata. My son, you and I, we're enough for the world. Now let's stop here and just name a few things that should be bothering us. First, what's with this whole laser eyes thing? You study Torah for a bunch of years and then, boom, you become a Marvel superhero? I mean, I'm no Rabbi Shimon, but I spent some time in yeshiva and all I got was a bad back. Also, why did they go on this rampage of destruction, and what changed for Rabbi Shimon the second time around? One day he's a human flamethrower, and a year later he's a peacemaker. What happened? And whatever it was, it seems to have something to do with that cryptic statement, you and I are enough for the world. Enough for what? How are we supposed to understand that? We're not ready to answer these questions just yet. Let's finish the story and bear our questions in mind as we see how it all gets resolved. Bahade Panya Damale Shabta. One Friday afternoon, as the sun was setting and Shabbat was arriving, Chazu Hahu Saba. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and his son saw an old man. Tahave Nakit Tre Medane Asav Rahit Ben Hashmashot. He was holding two big bundles of hadassim, fragrant myrtle branches, and running at twilight. Amruleh, they said to him, Hani lamalach, why do you have these branches in your hands? Amar lahu l'chlod Shabbat. He responded, they're in honor of Shabbat. Apparently hadassim were the 2nd century version of a fragrant bouquet of flowers. V'tiskilach b'chad. They asked him, wouldn't one bundle be enough? Chad keneged zachor, v'chad keneged shamor. The old man explained, one bundle corresponds to zachor, the commandment to remember Shabbat, and the other to shamor, the commandment to guard Shabbat. In other words, he seems to be saying that since the Bible uses two different words when it commands us to observe Shabbat, it deserves a double honor. Amr le lebre, chazi kama chavivin mitzvot al Yisrael. After hearing this, Rabbi Shimon turned to his son and said, look how beloved the commandments are to the children of Israel. Finally, yativ da'atayhu. Their minds were put to ease, and they lived happily ever after. So, do we feel like the story makes sense now? Do we know what it's really about? And what have we learned about Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai? Well, I'd like to suggest that this story is actually a progression. It shows an evolution in the way Rabbi Shimon looked at the world, from laser eyes to healing eyes to a mind at ease. Something pivotal changes at each step of the story. What are those changes? And what might they teach us about the greatness of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai? Let's take a look at the story one more time. When Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and his son were hiding from the Romans back in that cave, what was their life like? Every waking moment, 24/7, was spent praying or studying Torah. It's like the 10,000-hour rule for spirituality. When they emerge, they've ascended to incredible heights in their connection to God. In fact, it sounds like they've reached the highest level anyone could aspire to. They can see past the falsehood and the vanities of the world, material things like working the earth, and understand what's really important in life. Holy pursuits, like learning Torah, plumbing the depths of God's wisdom. They're so completely aligned with God's will that doing anything else doesn't make sense to them. And yet, if you only see the world in black and white, what happens to everything that doesn't fit in? Well, there's just no place for it. And maybe that explains the laser vision. Because if I really believe that the way we're meant to live life really is a matter of black and white, then when I see someone living the wrong way, then to me that's a worthless life. In my eyes, I'm basically reducing it to a pile of ash. So maybe, when Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai looked at the world around him and couldn't find any merit in what he saw, then either metaphorically or literally, that judgment burned everything to the ground. And you know how God feels about that kind of zealotry? Not so good. He actually responds by sending Rabbi Shimon right back into his cave. Because if we take that black and white either-or perspective, that only leaves space for people who see the world the way we see it. There's just no room for anyone or anything else. That's where Rabbi Shimon finds himself at the end of part 1 of the story. But what's he supposed to do now? How can he be true to what he believes and still manage to live in the world? And we know he did manage it somehow. When he comes out the second time, he puts a stop to the destruction. But how? What changed? Well, remember what he told his son. Dai la'olam ani ve'ata. You and I are enough for the world. Maybe what that means is Rabbi Shimon has found a new way to look at other people. The rest of the world, sure, they're crazy, and they're wrong, and it's an unimaginable tragedy that they're wasting their lives the way they are. But it doesn't mean we need to confront the tragedy and stomp it out. Dai la'olam ani ve'ata. The two of us can just live our lives the right way, and let that be enough. So here's Rabbi Shimon's basic approach. I can bear other people's existence as long as I just accept that they're woefully misguided and learn to expect nothing from them. I'm very tolerant. Now, I didn't actually do a survey, but I'll bet that if you go and ask your friends what they think about this kind of tolerance, it might make them a little uncomfortable. Sure, it's better than laser eyes, but Rabbi Shimon and his son aren't winning the Nobel Peace Prize anytime soon either. But we're not done yet. They have one more encounter. They meet an old man carrying myrtle branches just before Shabbat. And this time, they do something different. They don't just observe and judge. They ask him questions. They find their curiosity. They allow themselves to listen to someone else's perspective, something they wouldn't have been able to do a year earlier. And when they finally did, they found they could actually admire and appreciate someone who serves God differently. Other Jews also love God's commandments. Maybe they don't connect to God by spending all their time learning Torah. Maybe they connect to Him when they're in a field by cutting branches in His honor. But even if they go about their lives differently, they're still coming from the same good place we are. And now we understand the greatness of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. He was a man with incredible Torah knowledge, extreme devotion, and intense clarity. And he was a man who evolved to appreciate the beauty of other people's efforts to do the right thing. Think about how this applies to us. We all have those one or two views that we're just so sure about. The idea of anyone thinking differently just seems crazy. Maybe it's about religion, or maybe it's a political issue, or something more local to your community or family. Whatever it is, when someone has the opposite view, you just can't believe it. How can they not know they're wrong? And you just know you have to stop them. But even when we just know we're 100% right, when we know that we have more clarity or experience or intelligence or moral sensitivity, and the world would just be so much better when people finally listen to us, maybe standing on a soapbox is the wrong call. Instead, as Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai learned, maybe we need to stop and listen to other people and try to understand. Ask them difficult questions, raise our objections, see what kind of response we get. Now, that doesn't mean we need to agree with everything or even anything that we hear. But if the people we disagree with are coming from a good place, shouldn't we appreciate that and respect that? Lag BaOmer is the anniversary of the death of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. But according to tradition, it's also the day that marked the end of a terrible tragedy. Not too long before the story we told, another sage, Rabbi Akiva, lost 24,000 students in a plague. According to the Talmud, this plague was sent for one reason. These students failed to show each other respect. Despite their involvement in Torah study, this terrible flaw caused them all to perish. But this plague ended on Lag BaOmer. And what better way to emerge from this period than to celebrate the legacy of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, the man who learned how to respect others, even when they viewed the world in a radically different way. If you see that old man running down the street, carrying his 2 bundles of myrtle instead of studying Torah, whoever that man is for you, will you crusade against him? Will you ignore him? Or will you ask him to explain and listen? Happy Lag BaOmer.
好啦，短片啊睇完啦，喺呢處咧我哋作少少嘅評論，咁啊其實去年咧以色列咧成個國家都遭受到呢個嘅疫症嘅威脅，咁啊所以咧舊年咧佢哋其實應該係有呢個篝火節嘅活動嘅，咁啊但係因為疫症嘅緣故咧，成個國家全部取消晒，冇噶啦咁樣，咁啊所以咧1年之後咧，而家咧以色列人咧就已經係有成53%嘅人口咧已經係打咗2針嘅疫苗，咁所以咧並且佢哋喺4月嘅時候咧開始大規模咧係解封，咁所以大家都覺得冇事啦咁樣，於是咧就走晒出嚟，咁啊走晒出嚟咧有感染嘅機會之餘咧，咁啊仲加上咗咧佢哋群情洶湧啊，因為點解咧1年1度啊嘛舊年冇啊嘛咁樣，於是咧喺呢個疫症期間大家都閂晒喺屋企唔准出街咁滯，咁所以以色列國嘅裏邊咧第一個被允許政府批嘅大規模可以好多人一齊聚集嘅正常嘅宗教嘅慶典，就係呢一次嘅篝火節。喺咁嘅情況咧就出事啦。所以呢個篝火節咧原本好開心嘅大家出嚟載歌載舞咁圍住個火裏邊咧狂歡。咁呢一種咁嘅慶典咧真係好難得嘅，冇諗過咧竟然咧以一個咧收拾死亡嘅悲劇咧作為結束。咁所以咧，當我哋睇翻今次呢一個可以話係飛來嘅橫禍，一方面我哋了解猶太人選民同埋猶太教對於拉比嗰種嘅尊重，同埋對於以往裏邊咧佢哋嗰種對於口傳律法等等嘅睇重咧，我哋可以咧透過今次咧可以上到咧係重要嘅一課。嗱，考古新知咧就係將最新嘅考古資訊話俾大家聽。如果你係唔想錯過下一期嘅話咧，請你記得訂閱我哋嘅 YouTube channel。如果你想知多啲我所講嘅有關考古嘅事情嘅話咧，可以喺網上訂閱我嘅書《考古涉獵》，或者咧就係去到我哋嘅網上學習平台嗰處咧，得到更多資訊或者參加我哋網上嘅課程。如果你話唔係，我想跟你去到聖經嘅地方喎。咁你就可以考慮咧參加我哋嘅百般體驗嘅遊學團，以色列啊、希臘啊、土耳其啊等等，我哋都會帶你去嘅喎。